We're now live streaming and you may begin.
Thank you. So good morning, everybody. I'm chairing today, so we'll call the meeting to order. And I wonder if I can have a motion to adopt the agenda that was circulated. And Councillor Elmsley and a seconder, Councillor Dunn. Thank you. Do we have any declarations of pecuniary interest this morning? Seeing and hearing none. We'll move to adoption of the minutes of the previous meeting. Can I have a motion to accept the minutes? Penny, and a seconder, Linda. And do we have any comments or questions, discussion on those? Okay, and so call the motion then to adopt the minutes. And all in favor, or if you object? Yes, great. Okay, that has passed. Okay, business arising from the minutes. I went through, I didn't see anything, and we don't have anything listed on the agenda as the minutes or as the directions from the last minutes went to into the council presentation. So I think we can move then to item 6. So implementation of the task force recommendations. So as everybody knows, I think council did approve our recommendations. And so congratulations, first of all, to the task force on putting together really solid recommendations. And thank you to the support, from all the councillors on the task force for helping guide us through that process and see it come to a successful conclusion. And thank you, Rod, and the other staff as well for your support in your staff reports and information that was supplied. So in terms of implementation, I think maybe first I'll ask Rod to update us on status and next steps, and then maybe as a task force, we can discuss how we can support the next steps in implementation. So Rod?
Sure, thanks, Amy. I'll just go through the list of the recommendations. Actually, the first one around the community fund framework. Excuse me, I'll come back to last, because it's probably the bigger item. The other recommendations, the incorporation of the 2021 Lindsay Chest Fund, that will be form part of the community fund and be spelled out in the framework in terms of the specific allocation of that based on the limitations or restrictions on Lindsay. The community project capital funding program, that will be proceeding for 2021 without the 50-50 matching. And my understanding is there's some discussion because it wasn't specifically part of the recommendation, but it was referenced that the goal would be for council to consider increasing, in essence, doubling the actual fund for 2021, because with the fund, if it's based on, I'm just using for simplicity standpoint, 100,000. If the budget was 100,000 before, there'd be $200,000 in projects that might be approved, with the 50% being that 100,000. So if council kept it at that 100,000 for 2021 and required no cost sharing, there would only be 100,000 in projects next year instead of the regular 200. So I understand that would be coming. That specific allocation of the additional money would be part of the 2021 budget discussions to have that other funding added to it. So in essence, there'd be still the same amount of work being done within the community, but with just the full funding coming from the city. So that'll be part of that process. The recommendation around the internal resources and supports, that is something we've begun working on. We'll be looking at and considering the results of this. There was the surveys that were done of agencies in terms of what type of things they were looking for, and as well continued feedback in terms of continuing monitoring of input, hopefully through what's in Jump In Kawartha Lakes, or having guess part of the discussion is, do we continue to receive feedback, how that can be possible through Jump In? Perhaps Brenda could comment on that in a minute. If there's a way for sort of an open portal through there for comments to come in over time in support of those types of things, that there's specific needs, supports, resources that are available over time. So coming back to the community fund, that's the bigger one. We've already started some work on that based on the discussions we had here and in the working groups, looking at sort of the broader parameters of what was there. There's the document from the working group around recommendations about what that framework looks like. We'll just need to put that into a broader definitions and process. So we were I've also last week or the week before, we had a meeting with Rebecca Mustard and some others that were from the economic task force, because there is going to be from that task force recommendations, there was I don't have the wording in front of me, the fund in support of the arts and culture sector. So trying to, as we're developing it, try to be at least on the higher level sort of principles of it, alignment there. So ultimately it may come out as one initial program and then with 2 streams to it. So again, that's sort of the discussions we're having. So if it goes out from a publicizing the fund standpoint, it might be one process, and then people apply for which stream, an arts and culture stream and the community stream. So that's some of the discussions we've already had, and we're going to be having more discussions on that as well. That framework for the fund, one way or the other, has to come back to council for approval. So I know it had said in the report, the recommendations, that would be Q1 2021. If the first meeting in 2021, there's a committee of the whole meeting, I believe it's January 12th. And then 2 weeks later, the full regular council meeting. If the goal would be if through December to meet the timelines in advance of that January meeting, if it can be, excuse me, if it can be prepared in time for that, earlier the better. But we just have to see in terms of if that work can be completed to get it to council for January. The next cycle then would be into the February cycle. So until that gets to council, they do have to approve it. I was just going to reference as well, it's not a direct recommendation around it, but actually tomorrow, December 1st council meeting is a special council meeting primarily focusing on the capital budget. But there is a report as part of tomorrow's agenda, which is on the city's website already, relating to the city's 2019 surplus and the options for the disposition of that surplus. And it is identified within that report that the recommendation is just high level in terms of just finding it that the surplus be maintained in the city's contingency reserve for purpose of funding community, economic, and corporate pandemic recovery initiatives. So that will be part of a recommendation council will consider tomorrow. So just really back to the fund. So that'll come out tomorrow. It doesn't relate to the framework or anything related to the actual fund itself. It's just identifying a potential funding source for those various programs or those initiatives. And I think that's sort of where we're at right now. So like I said, the work is underway and on that framework. And there would be, my expectation is as we're going through that, whether we get to a draft or questions back and forth between the working groups or the task force itself at future meetings, just for input around those principles of the framework.
Thank you, Rod. Are there some questions or comments from members of the task force? Everyone's perfectly satisfied with the.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Ron.
Rod, do you have a list? Do you have a breakdown of where the funds would be potentially going, and so we could have that for tomorrow, so we could discuss it, because we're making a pretty big decision tomorrow. do you have a breakdown roughly? Like, I'm not disputing it or anything, but I just wanted to know, like, what's the, how will it be allocated? Where will it be allocated to? Like, will we have that possibly by tomorrow?
No, it would be the actual framework when it's developed will determine or define really what sort of potential scope of projects, requests or like applications might be. So that would be developed as part of that framework, and that's yet to be developed. So we don't have any. I mean, there's some discussion of the previous working groups, but apart from that, there's been no decision yet on what scope of projects, limits or anything like that has been determined yet. That would all come with the framework. So the recommendation tomorrow is just relating to the allocation of that surplus to the reserve. There's no allocation out to any organization or any specific funds. The actual allocation to the reserve is just basically holding that money for potentially those funds or initiatives.
Okay, well, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Okay, thanks. Great.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments? Yes, Linda.
Hi, thanks. First of all, just a quick note of thanks to everybody, but particularly you, Amy and Heather. I did watch the YouTube stream of your presentation, and you guys did a great job. So thanks for doing that. And I think I just need a bit of clarification, Rod, maybe around what are the groups? Have we already established which groups are going to be working on the framework moving forward? Because I think there's a lot of overlap between all of the recovery groups that are working on this. Or are we trying to decide some of that today? Thanks.
The actual development of the framework itself.
Right.
So that would be, the recommendation was for city staff based on the input that we've received. So we have, looking at my piles here, we had a draft from the, I forget if it's on the working group or from an earlier meeting around sort of high level pieces there of like what the scope would be, what considered in part of the evaluation criteria, evaluation committee, and those types of things. So that will help form the basis, but we'll be coming back to probably through working group as opposed to the full open task force group, just for comments and input to that as well.
Okay,
that those sort of recommendations were mostly within there, but it's sort of fine tuning it.
Super, that makes perfect sense. I just wanted to make sure we had what you needed from our group at this point, and then you'll come back with whatever feedback. Perfect, thanks.
Yeah, for sure.
So with that, to follow on that, Rod, would you, it might make sense then for us to identify those working group members today. We don't have to keep our, the two working groups that had been operating have sort of finished their tasks that they were asked to do. So here's an opportunity then to identify the people on this task force who would like to be the working group to review that framework. Would you agree? Would that help you?
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if we have a next meeting set up yet. Or we'll come to that later on, but maybe associated with that. Might be better as a working group, just instead of like in 2 weeks from now, if we're gonna have a regular meeting. Might be more valuable in terms of the timing. I'm just not sure whether or not 2 weeks from now or as an ad hoc group into December sometime. But if there's a small group identified, that would be great.
Okay, well, let's start with that. We can figure out the timing. But can I have then volunteers who would be willing to look at the draft framework to assist city staff, possibly bringing that perspective as, as someone who runs a nonprofit and could see, kind of put yourselves in the shoes of those who might be applying for the funds. So are there some volunteers? Show of hands are raised. So I've got Heather and Linda. Okay, and Penny. I think that's a a really solid working group. Okay, all right,
That'd be great.
wonderful.
Yeah. So
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say once I'll probably know more in the next like sort of week or two, and maybe set up a or maybe I might just set up a sort of a placeholder meeting for 2 or 3 weeks from now with the group of us just to touch base.
Okay, great. And now, is there anything else? I wanted to talk about the capacity building portion, just in terms of next steps. But is there anything, any other questions or comments related to the fund at this time? No? Okay. So the second part of the recommendations, Rod, was the so the capacity building, and you have suggested you thought maybe Brenda could provide some input into next steps there in terms of how Jumping Porthole Lakes could be used. But I think there was also within that recommendation the opportunity or instruction to rally external resources as well. So I imagine members of the task force will have some input and thoughts into how those outside of the city could help. So let's maybe, as a task force, I think we should focus in on that for a minute. Brenda, did you want to add anything first to what Rod said earlier? No? No? Okay. Rod, is there a way that task force members could also help in that area in developing the capacity building next steps? Heather? Oh, Heather wanted to, yeah.
Yeah, I was just clearing my throat. I will add something in after Rod. I just wanted to see where the city's coming from and then just add to that.
Okay.
I think probably from the first step is sort of identifying the range and going back to sort of the comments from the surveys and jump in the Jumping Porthole Lakes around what we're being sought. And even perhaps now, if we have a tool of sending out, and maybe look for Brenda on that to confirm if we have the ability to send out comments back to emails, contact to people who had submitted previous ones, just for clarity. If there's places of clarity, if they're say if they asked about PPE, are they maybe for clarity, are you looking for actual source of PPE, coordination around the procurement, like group procurement, just sourcing it, or information about from a health and safety standpoint of what's the best to use, or how to set up organizations or facilities with PPE, just to clarify some of those things to get a little bit more precise. And then we can sort of source out potentially where that could be. Is the city available to it, or from an ask out in terms of the external groups, where that capacity might be. Because like I said, it might not necessarily all be the city, but just sort of clarifying some of those asks.
Rod just covered what I was going to ask to say. Will the capacity be or presenters or content come from the city and as well as beyond? There are many experienced individuals in the community, and I'm sure all of us here can express we know someone who excels at this and someone who excels in that. So as we get through figuring out what the needs are and from the community members of what they're looking for, if the city is not able to fulfill that skill set, how would we go back out to the community to find someone that is?
Linda.
I think the other source of information ideally will come through that other piece around the applications for the funding, because we previously identified as part of the framework that we want agencies and organizations to identify some ideas around how they would be sustainable. And so I think that will be another good source, hopefully, of information around building capacity that we can utilize to support some planning there as well.
That's a great point. Brenda, so the question has been posed. Is there a way that you would suggest is efficient and that you would recommend to use Jumping Kawartha Lakes to go back to those who responded earlier to the surveys?
We can do that for sure. We can set it up as a survey or even just a quick poll, depending on how much information we're looking for. I think it might be helpful if we had a working group of a few people to kind of talk about what it is we're trying to discover, so we can put that together.
Okay. Well, I'm willing. I think that's another good suggestion. So again, carving out our work into 2 smaller working groups. I think I would be comfortable volunteering Marina because she's not here, but she was really in tune with the needs assessment earlier. So I can ask Marina if she would consider helping, and I'd be able to help as well. So that's at least 2 of us. Is there anybody else who would like to help in that area? Linda, you're a sucker for punishment. Okay. All right. Well, that's, oh, Heather's taking her.
I was just going to say, if you needed more support, I would be happy to do it. But if you have enough people on the table, I'm happy to not.
Okay. Good. All right. So that's a good start. So Brenda, I will reach out to Marina for sure, and then we can coordinate as well with Linda and yourself, and we can talk about some next steps there for starters. Okay, so anything we're missing in terms of this agenda item? So this was about implementation of our recommendations. Was there anything else anyone wanted to raise at this time on this topic? Okay, we all know that counselors have a big role to play still as these things come, you know, become more detailed and recommendations come back to council. So, you know, thank you again for all of your support and support for the community and our task force as well. And if there's any way that we can assist in, you know, next steps and to support you in the upcoming council decisions, please don't hesitate to reach out to members of the task force. Okay, I just need to get to a different screen here. Sorry. Okay, so the next item on our agenda, thank you everybody for that, is update on funding opportunities. I do believe that this is so that we can continue to keep that Jumping Kawartha Lakes current for those organizations that are experiencing needs right now. And if just as a group, if we can continue to keep Brenda apprised of any new funding opportunities that we're hearing about or seeing. So is there anything anyone would like to share at this time? Heather.
Just a quick note to say, I know Brenda and I have been sort of back and monitoring it a little bit, and I have posted up a few podcasts and pre-recorded webinars. And I also put the information, or I think Brenda put the information in about the date change for the OTF Resilience Fund. And then earlier this, or I guess last week, I did put the link up to the framework for the rent subsidies from the federal government. So for those who needed that. So I know between Brenda and myself, we have been monitoring it and putting any significant updates on it. There are lots of smaller little supports that are available as well. So as Amy said, please feel free to share.
Good. And I think it has been suggested that today's federal economic statement may include some additional funding. So that'll be something, Brenda, that task force members can kind of keep an eye on. And if we see anything, we can share with you. In terms of if there are additional federal funding opportunities. Okay, anything else on this item? All right. Okay, Right. So the next item of business is item number 8, ongoing community impacts. And I confess I've forgotten what this item is all about. Rod.
I think it was just, there's some emails back last week just about how to identify, and this probably, I think the reference was back to Jumping Kawartha Lakes, to identify, again, we're working towards a fund, we identified the surveys last fall, but just a method or some way to continue to be able to receive, because as things evolve, we're going into the start of the winter, things are changing. There's going to be new impacts through the holiday season, things different, just how we can identify, and again, we might come back to that portal, Jumping Kawartha Lakes, as new things are coming up. I know we're proceeding with the framework, and but from a community needs impacts standpoint, how can we continue to have an avenue for people or groups to identify it, whether it's a specific contact directly or through the portal, just as new things come up, because again, we're 9-10 months into the pandemic. As we're going into a new the winter, I'm not sure we can say for sure that there won't be new impacts or other things coming about. So just some way to identify that, and either through ask outs or the portal. I think it's important just to keep on top of that, because we don't necessarily have an idea of what new things will be coming up over the next little while. So Brenda, I'm sure Brenda, from your standpoint, is it something we can identify specifically as sort of an open portal, and then on occasion sort of advertise or put out sort of communications around just to identify things, just so things aren't lost, or that there isn't an avenue to identify those types of issues?
We can set up Jump In to have a discussion forum, or have people submit ideas. There are different tools that we can use. We just have to see whether or not we want this open to the public. So it's for organizations and the broader public, or just for organizations, and sort of how best we can gather that information. But there are tools available.
So on
I
the
would
topic,
sorry, Amy, if I can, I would assume, Brenda, that something like that would have to be facilitated, those discussions and the prompted questions, so that they would be on point, on topic, brought back, so they don't get too far off the grid of what we're looking for. Is that what you're thinking? And would that be a staff role to sort of lead off with a question every few days and see what happens?
Yes, so there's different ways you can set up the tools. So if we do a discussion forum, we can set it up so that only administrators can ask questions. So then we're just getting responses to those. So that's a little more directed. Or we can leave it open that anyone who's registered can ask a question. And now everything that goes onto Jump In as a response is moderated by Bang the Table, the company that provides our engagement platform. So everything's moderated to begin with, but then it is managed by staff. So it would come to me, and I would be responsible for ensuring that it meets all of our criteria, and that it's on topic and those types of things.
It seems like it would go really well with the capacity aspect that Amy's looking for, to have those prompted questions and really kind of narrow down and get specifics on, have a kind of 2 or 3 day focus on a specific topic like PPE, and then another 2 or 3, I'm just picking numbers arbitrarily, and then another kind of chunk of time on fundraising, and another chunk of time on other stuff. So then you could really ask those questions on an ongoing basis and get that dialogue about what are the needs. As Rada had expressed, there's multiple aspects of each of those topics. So we need to make sure we're filling in and hitting the masses of what everyone needs, because everyone's going to need slightly different. So where's the middle balance of that? So this would be a good tool for that.
Certainly, I agree. I think it's something Marina and Linda and I can help to bring some direction to. One of the items that Brenda raised was the question as to whether we open up the discussion topics more broadly than organizations. We've really focused on organizations identifying their needs. So how do people feel about that now? Is there a change in direction needed at this time, or do we stay the course with organization needs?
I would say at this point, stay with the organizations, as it's going to be aligning with the community fund. So I think that would be really helpful that we stay the course at this point.
Linda?
Yeah, I would agree. I think I would like to assume that agencies and organizations are continue to be engaged with their clientele, with their consumers. So ideally, they've found a way to make sure that they're representing the feedback of the folks that are accessing their services.
Anyone else have an opinion or suggestion on this? Penny?
I agree. I think it should be organizations. I think we need to stay focused. And I agree with Linda. I think there's sort of an expectation that agencies know what services they need to be delivering and to what audiences and to what locations. So I think we have to make that assumption, but to sort of stay on point and try and focus in on who's thriving and who needs specifics. I think it should be just orgs at this point.
Okay, and any objections? I think we've got 3 strong statements about that direction that are consistent. Okay, just another question for the group and for Brenda potentially. So I think our highest, trying to remember how many have registered. I mean, I think our survey respondents at the highest point was 50 or 60, something like that, which was pretty good from our starting point. But I think we all know probably organizations that didn't respond. And it would be nice to start to get more people engaged in the conversation. So as we are getting more precise in our discussions and clarity, identifying the clarity of needs, does anyone have any suggestions of how we might stimulate more participation on Jumping Forth the Lakes with the targeted organizations? Go ahead, Heather.
One way we could do is through a Zoom meeting and actually have more of a face-to-face interaction as opposed to a survey. Surveys are great, but having a facilitated discussion and maybe having 2 or 3 of them to catch everybody's schedule might be helpful.
So are you suggesting, so in lieu of the using jump-in discussion topic formats, have like a focus group on Zoom? Is that what you're thinking?
I'm saying both would be very helpful.
Go ahead, Brenda.
I think that would be a great idea to have a Zoom session where we can actually introduce the discussion forums and jump in and ask people what they'd like to see there, and see if there's barriers to their participation. You know, most people, what we hear is, I don't have time, or I don't know, there's something there. So, you know, if we can understand better why it's not being used, and we haven't used the discussion forum tool yet, so we don't know that it's not going to be used, but we can identify proactively any barriers that might exist. But I think having a discussion about it would be great.
Other thoughts? Yes, Linda?
So I'm trying to say this nicely. I think the best success I have with getting increased feedback and engagement is that I become a dog with a bone, and I just keep following up and following up and following up and targeting, checking who's responded, looking at the list of who hasn't, and following up and trying to find who's the manager, who's the person that I'm going to get the in with. And I think with time being a more precious resource, that we need to be prepared as a group to put in the time to do that targeted follow-up. I think when we give everybody the information and assume they're going to do it, everybody has great intentions, but without that follow-up, I've not had great engagement. So there you go. That was as nice as I could say it.
Well said, Linda.
Well, we do have, we did earlier divide up the list of the initial target list. And we had individuals take responsibility for reaching out to those. And
I was one of the people that did that, and I followed up like mercilessly to try to get folks to, and I think Marina did as well. So that was, I'm a little worried that the numbers of respondents would have been significantly less without that approach.
So would you suggest, Linda, that at this time we should go back to those original lists that we had and had responsibility for, to, maybe with an invitation to a Zoom meeting to discuss the next steps?
Sure. I mean, I think whatever list we're using for whatever engagement we're looking for, I would just suggest that that's a strategy that we will want to be using, that we have mechanisms in place where people are going to continue to follow up. And because again, everybody's intentions are good, but often not until they get the third personal reminder that that they come to the table to do that. So whether it's the Zoom meeting where we're going to go through the tool, or whatever feedback we're looking at, I think the only exception to that is probably going to be when we release the funding applications. And then that'll be, I don't know that we're going to have to ask too many times for that. But otherwise, when we're looking for that feedback, I just think we need to have mechanisms into place for continuous follow-up.
I was just going to say, Amy, around even referencing like through that feedback back now, if sort of as that carrot, not about the fund specifically directly, but identifying that these recommendations have now been approved by council, it shows there has been progress made from the previous work. So we have recommendations, concrete recommendations to moving forward, and continued feedback to not just on the implementation of those, but to inform further things over the next few months, further planning and operation. Hope might generate more by sort of showing that progress today.
Great. Well, I think it's a good discussion. So, so what I'm hearing is that we want to, so number one, we need to identify what it is that we need from these individuals. We need to know, as an example, if we're looking for clarity about needs, what types of needs are we looking for more clarity on? And I think that's, and then it's how do we get that? So there are different options. We have the discussion topic options, the forum options on Jump In, but we also have potentially the Zoom meeting as part of that or in addition to. And we know that we want to get more engagement, and we have lists of the original targets that are kind of apportioned to individual members of the task force. So it seems to me the first thing is for this new working group around the needs. So Linda, Marina, and myself to identify exactly what it is that we need so that we can communicate that out to these organizations and then figure out the right steps to get that additional clarity. Does that make sense? I don't know if I worded that very well, but Linda's nodding and I think Heather nodded, so I'll take that. Okay, so we will convene our this working group. Brenda will definitely loop in with you, and we'll consider all of these different things in our planning. So Zoom meeting, discussion forums, and the targeted and relentless outreach. Okay, that sounds great. All right. Anything further on the topic of ongoing community impacts? All right. Where are we on? So we're now on new business. Is there anything anyone would like to bring today to the task force in new business? Pretty quiet. Actually, just as a, I think we have our answer, but one of the, Heather and I had thought it was a good time to just kind of confirm that everybody who's currently on the task force is still committed, because we did, our term hasn't ended. Our term, I believe, is to December 31st, 2021. But we did feel that, you know, we've gone through kind of the first big effort in our, if we look at this in stages. And so we just wanted to kind of get a sense of that, to make sure that those existing task force members are still able to commit to the next steps. I think we kind of have our answer, because we've had people raise their hands in terms of joining the working groups. And I think our counselors are with us to the bitter end regardless. So I think, Heather, I believe we have our answer. Are you comfortable with that? Yeah, okay. Anything else, new business? No? Okay, so I think we have our next item would be our roundtable discussion. So does anyone have a topic for the roundtable discussion this morning?
Just a one.
Yeah, Ron, go ahead.
A couple things. So the committees, I'd like to stay on the committee. It's up to the mayor, because he'll make the decision, I guess, in the next week or so, who's going to be on what committee for the next 2 years. Like, I'd like to stay on the committees that I'm on, not just this one, but the other ones. But it's up to the mayor to decide. So really, I'm kind of up in the air right now. I want to stay on it, but it all hinges on whether every councillor stays on their respective committee. So I don't know. I can't. It's kind of in a. Nothing's definite right now. like I said, I'd like to stay on every committee I'm on, but it's up to the mayor. So, and as far as the contingency reserve, I believe that's going to the operating budget, and that won't be until probably February when they decide about this contingency reserve. So just so I let you know, like, it's not capital, it's an operating budget item. I don't want to give you bad news, but that's where it's going to be discussed. And it wouldn't be until February. It could be the end of January. That's what I was told by the mayor. So,
Rod?
Sorry, just on tomorrow's agenda, it's item 6.2 on
Right.
tomorrow's agenda. Options for disposition of 2019 surplus. Just
that's right, but it wouldn't be decided until it's in the operating budget discussion. Like, I know there's a report tomorrow, but it's to be operating.
Yeah, any decision on the use of it, I believe, but I was just pointing out that budget or that item for tomorrow. It's just identifying that is for now staying in that reserve, potentially for those uses.
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for the clarity on the committee memberships, Councillor. Is there anything else for the roundtable this morning? No. Seeing nothing and hearing nothing. Okay, is that our, oh, correspondence, right. So I didn't see any correspondence. Holly's shaking her head. Okay, so no correspondence this morning. So our next meeting, so do we have one in the calendar is the question.
There's one scheduled for December 14th, 2 weeks today.
So would that be a better time frame for working groups? Now, Linda's on both working groups, so we couldn't have both working groups at the same time, but if that's already kind of parked in people's schedules, we could maybe do the first half for one working group and the second half for another working group. Would that make sense to everybody? I've got a thumbs up from Linda. And a nod from Rod and a nod from Heather and Penny.
Time's already set aside.
Yeah, it's always easier to work with something that's already penciled in there. So, okay, so do we want, does anyone have a preference of which working group then starts off the day on that morning at 10 a.m.? Because some of you aren't on both working groups, including me.
No preference. Linda, you're on both. You can split the tie.
What do you want to start with, Linda, that day?
It doesn't matter to me.
Penny, do you have a preference? No? Oh, man.
I was just gonna say if just gonna recommend if 10 to 11 was the framework, the fund framework, just from a schedule standpoint, better, and then the second one at 11 till 12.
All right. Okay, we have a suggestion. That's great. So in that case, just for no, those are working groups, so they wouldn't be report or live on YouTube, but could we still use the, would Holly still be able to set them up for us? Yeah.
You probably just split out separate, do separate meeting invitations and put a separate link for each one, just in case the one runs over, but.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
That sounds great. Thank you, everybody. Okay. I think that's it. I keep referring back to my agenda. Yes. Okay, so if there's nothing further, then I just need a motion to adjourn, please. And that would be from Pat. Done. Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you,
I know.
Amy.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, everybody.